the question of Israeli-Palestinian conflict was not so critical for our community as Russian-Ukraine, and everyone supports Ukraine very much, but the problematic, as you really said, exaggeration offshore is really pivotal in my community now of Russian, because it's very mixed of Russian Jews, Soviet Russian Jews, and so yes, I feel much gratitude just being possible to talk about this here, but in a very nuanced manner, and that's why I wanted to ask you, and I think it's a question to you all, and probably start with Anton. Broad question, like what strategies you think do historians have now in times of ongoing rise of censorship, also in academia, and do you see still possible to speak directly, or you prefer like inventing new language of writing between the lines, reading between the lines, and because I also want to name one important precedent of Nancy Fraser, who has been cancelled philosophical visiting professorship from Köln University, and yes, how it influenced your community also of historians, because I know more from philosophical community. What is about historians? So if you understood the question.
Can I try to rephrase your question? And if I'm wrong, please correct me. You ask me, what can we do? Oh, excuse me. You ask me if I understood you correctly, and perhaps I will brutally abbreviate what you said. What should we do when we are faced with censorship attempts vis-à-vis the work of historians?
Yeah, like do we still have this possibility of talking freely? Yeah. So yes, when there is censorship, do we speak still freely, or we invent new ways of speaking about things important to us, but in a subtle manner?
The Aesopian language, the coded language that is has been used a lot in Russia and China and other countries with a tradition of speaking between the lines and reading between the lines, has never disappeared. That is true. If, for example, Oleg Orlov from Memorial is at his trial, and he is reading Kafka's The Trial while there is taken a picture of his. That is a coded language in which Orlov clearly defies the Russian judges that are about to sentence him. This has never disappeared, and it will not disappear. But I'm currently writing a small book called Censorship of History for a series in the United Kingdom. It will be published next year, and in this I argue, in my conclusion, I will argue that the censorship attempts have changed. The nature of the censorship attempts have changed. Previously, until 2 decades ago, censorship was suppression of content. I now simplify and summarize a very more extensive analysis. Censorship equaled suppression of content, of historical content. This has changed, I believe, under the pressure of the development of digital technology, and the classical censorship is not away. It still survives. It is there as it has never been away. But there is another kind of censorship, which I would call reverse censorship, that is focusing on the audiences, and that uses two techniques, two very recent techniques. The first one is flooding, called flooding. You flood a certain landscape, political, social, cultural landscape, with disinformation produced by bots and by trolls. And in the midst of that ocean of disinformation, you cannot find the reasoned analysis of the professional historian anymore. So the serene work of the historian disappears amidst the ocean, amidst an ocean of disinformation. That's the first new phenomenon, flooding of disinformation. The second new phenomenon is, of course, artificial intelligence, which can produce the most perfect falsification. Until very recently, falsifications always left their traces, and good historians were able to detect it. But now we may be on the verge, on the border of a new era in which falsifications have become Orwellian perfect copies of realities that do not exist. And if we combine these two new strategies of coping with the past, flooding the market with false ideas, and then produce perfect falsifications and fabrications, we have a very dire picture of the future landscape, I think. I think we should all be afraid of what is coming in the next decades over us. And I fear that the community of historians, with its fine principles, is not able in its own to combat this. Take, for example, a sacred cow of ours, multi-perspectivity. It has been introduced here by Felix, I believe, in the previous session. I completely endorse multi-perspectivity for the reason that you told us, equality of visions. But suppose that I come to you, I enter this room and I say, hello, my name is Putin, Vladimir Putin. I want to participate in this debate. Please give me an equal voice. And I have a website. It's called Kremlin.ru. It's a very fine website. I already published essays on the history of Russia. I'm fond of Russian historians. Please give me a platform. What would you do? You say, in the name of multi-perspectivity, you are obliged to say every perspective has an equal right to be voiced. And then we are even if that is a very good and solid concept in history education and elsewhere, we are in trouble there, because there's not only the perspective of the people who are forgotten that is being rehabilitated, but you also have the perspective of the powerful who already dominate the market with their false ideas, that by that logic of multi-perspectivity, you have to invite inside. And there I see trouble. So I am, after my analysis about the censorship of history, I have become very pessimistic.
Thank you very much. And maybe you also want to speak about this? Answer, Anton, or?
Thank you. First, I'm not a historian. I'm a sociologist and political scientist. And according to artificial intelligence, which I sometimes tend to call alternative intelligence, I'm a scholar activist, which I consider as a compliment, despite the fact that in Germany it would provoke Naserümpfen. You're not supposed to be. You are either academic or you're an activist. I feel actually closer to you than to academia. So my answer is a different one. As Anton has already summarized, plethora of historic research has been undertaken since generations over what is close to the truth, whatever you understand as truth. It doesn't help. Algorithm replaces knowledge. That's today's situation. So entering a debate based on mere rationality is a battle we risk to lose. We need to reactivate something which tends to be forgotten in scholarly debates. That is compassion and empathy. Because scholarly debates should also be value-based debates, framed in proper knowledge creation, but guided by taking sides. What is just? What is based on international normative frameworks we subscribe to? And that also means to leave behind the pure reduction on a scholarly position and act as a human being.
Yes, I'm definitely not a friend of cancel culture, I can say. I think in a liberal democratic system we have to endure other opinions. And what we shouldn't do is to mark positions at a first glance as not legitimate, as illegitimate. To say, okay, this is a Nazi, I don't hear what he is telling me, or that's definitely an anti-Semitic position because you are not a friend of Israel, or something like that. I think this tries to mark positions as illegitimate and to bring them out of the discourse is a problem in our society. But on the other hand, we have a problem with social media, of course, because we have these algorithms, and these algorithms are based on scandalization, on taboo breaking and something like that, and they make it stronger, these positions, because we live in a public sphere which is based on attention, and a position which is completely a taboo also brings more attention than a standard position which is without a doubt a part of the discourse you can have. And so I think we need a regulation of the platforms to limit these mechanisms to produce attention through extreme positions, through scandalization, to taboo breaking, and so on. Okay.
Just a short clarification of your last point. And you believe that this control of the platforms also will help with the institutional powers also, and as well as like censorship, and is it well connected?
Yes, maybe. This institutional power is on one hand is a classical aspect. We have always in history, in the Soviet Union, in the Nazi system, we have powerful propaganda organizations, institutions which have much resources and much money and much power to bring their positions in the public sphere. But I think what it makes more difficult is the logic of the social media platforms now, because they make this position stronger. They make it very much cheaper to do this. They make it easier, they make it global, they produce communities, so-called bubbles, which brings people the feeling of the sense of a community, of a social belonging, and I think this is a new quality of this.
I'm not so technophobic. I believe still in the power of online platforms as well as place to spread the counter narratives, and I know a lot of good projects, like Memorial also, doing a big work of spreading the just ego histories, like personal stories of people, and it is somehow working with the Russian-speaking audience, I hope. And I know that many other historians trying to also be public and do public history. So we'll see if it's working. Maybe we have questions from the audience. Yes.
Let me thank all of you for your introductory remarks. But I would like to continue something which Anton took up, namely the issue of denial. And first of all, I'm glad that you did mention the Nakba in 1948, but you did not mention what we have been witnessing for the past months in Gaza. And that is something that we should not primarily as historians address, but as human beings. But historians also have a role, because I think it's very important to make it clear that this is not a conflict that started in October 23. It has much longer roots and much longer history, and we should recognize and know that history to be able to understand how we can hopefully find a solution to the conflict. And then there's you mentioned denial, and denial is obviously something we have to oppose. But there's a more benign form of denial, and that's forgetting. And in many, we in Historians Without Borders have been dealing with how to address ongoing conflicts and how could historians contribute to peace, conflict mediation and peace agreements. And there is a school of thought which says that you should brush the history of the conflict under the carpet and just deal with the present and the future. But I take strong exception to this view, because if you do not openly address the root causes and the history of the conflict, you may have and enter into a peace agreement that can be undone, because this history you have not dealt with can return as a zombie and threaten the whole peace agreement. And that's what I would like to also hear your opinions on the role of forgetting as distinct from denial in dealing with history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also see hands there, so probably we can give. And there, I think there were hands before again. Yours.
All right. So, thank you, Professor. My name is KG Brown. I'm a student here at ICD. My question is directed to the professor. That in societies that have experienced atrocities, can there be true healing? And what can be done to bring about reconciliation and national unity and lasting healing in those societies? Thank you.
Let me try to answer the first question, which is close to my topic. Is forgetting a benign form of denial? I make a conceptual distinction between both. because denial is intentional. Forgetting is sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. And it is a very, forgetting, I have thought a lot about forgetting, is a very slippery concept. Why? Because you cannot order somebody to forget something. That is impossible. Also, you cannot order yourself to forget something. You cannot forget on command. That's very important. So if there are taboos, subjects about which people do not speak, we should realize, keenly be aware, that there are people who know what is behind the taboo, who know what happened. And even if they are, if social forgetting is imposed, social forgetting is never complete. If taboos are imposed on a population, for example, through memory laws, the concept was mentioned this morning, memory laws, as it is the case in Russia. Since 2010, there have been a huge flood of memory laws in which people cannot say what they really want to express about the past. But even if there are taboos, there are always people, individuals, who know the realities that cannot be mentioned and that are tabooed. The closest, the phenomenon most close to forgetting is, I think, amnesty. The phenomenon of amnesty, the phenomenon in which you declare, in which you annul a certain sentence of a perpetrator, or you annul a certain verdict, you annul a certain punishment for a crime. If historians are, after an amnesty has been decreed, if they are prohibited from mentioning the amnestied crime, there we have a form of censorship. But it can be called forgetting, but that is a semantic play in that example. So if people use the word forgetting, you always have to ask, what do we really mean? Because forgetting is never total. It is never complete. There are always people who know and who want to investigate what has happened. So I'm a bit afraid to conflate forgetting and denial. Let's stop there for a moment.
Was your question on healing also answered? Okay, maybe you want to answer the last question of healing.
The question was if there is true reconciliation. That was the meaning of your question, right? Facing the truth and how you can, if there is anything like true reconciliation.
Yes, the question was, in societies that have faced atrocities, and then there's been denial or minimization of those atrocities, can they be true healing? And what can be done to bring about true healing, reconciliation, and national unity in those societies?
Well, I think the ultimate precondition is that descendants in perpetrator societies are willing to live up to the historical facts that happened. That brings back this question of amnesia, aphasia, forgetting, whatever. So you need to create a point of departure where descendants of perpetrators are willing to accept that crimes were committed. I think if that is not happening, you will never create a sustainable framework to interact and meet in a way where people can live up to dealing with what happened in the past. And it denies the descendants of victims the respect and recognition. This is why I used the word empathy already before. I think it's a very essential element in interaction.
Yes, I'm a little bit skeptical because I think, yeah, reconciliation. I try to highlight that there are always very self-centered points of views on history in Germany after 1945. So after the war, all the destructions of the war stood in the center of the attention of the remembrance culture. Yeah, our houses were bombed. Yeah, our relatives are dead. And something like that. And this is shifting to the 1990s when said, okay, the really true crime was the Shoah. Yeah. But I don't think that it has to do with really reconciliation. It's only a shift of points of views, of perspectives, in some way of really opportune political matter. So I think we don't have the right or the wrong history. Normally, there are extremes, of course, but we have different narratives, and the narratives depends on the point of view and the political culture and political circumstances of the society and the political system in this special era.
Thank you. We have 15 more minutes, and I propose people from the audience speaking more and taking place, not only with questions, but with exact statements and opinions. And yes, thank you. I see it here.
Thank you very much. My name is Happy. I come from Malawi, but I have participated in some initiatives in Africa, like in the Gambia after Yaya Jammeh, and I've been following the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, as well as in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, as one of the players trying to do scenario planning and stuff. But one thing that I've come to conclude is transitional justice does not usually help the victims of the atrocities. I feel like to some extent it's a way of just trying to protect the perpetrators because they don't, the long arm of the law doesn't get to them. So this is closure that for me sounds cosmetic. And it's also worse, like the situation in South Africa a few months ago. The whole thing about differences, economic discrepancies that we see there were being interpreted wrongly by one of the global leaders, Donald Trump, who said white farmers in South Africa were being killed, and he called it genocide, forgetting that this goes back to what happened after the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa. So going forward, I think it could only make sense if we don't just end at listening to two sides and we say, yeah, we can forget about it and move on as a rainbow nation and stuff like that. But we should say those who were involved in the crimes themselves, they should face the law. And it's depressing when countries like the US don't want to be part of the International Criminal Court. So these are some of the things that just show us that there's a lot of tokenism, decoration, and just like cosmetic stuff. And that perhaps this one area that we need to dive in going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. More statements? Yeah, here there was.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the German narratives about the Second World War, because what I see is that two topics dominate. It's the Holocaust, for obvious reasons, and the aggression against Soviet Union in 1941. While the Nazi occupation of Poland is sort of absent from the broader public's mental maps. So I would like to ask, why is it so? And are there any ways to fix it? Thank you.
And probably, yeah, it's probably someone from the audience also want to answer. Or
what is absent exactly from our mental map?
The awareness about the realities of the Nazi occupation in Poland.
Yeah.
Of Poland.
Yeah. There is a huge ignorance in Poland about this, but that ignorance is certainly not complete. There are many people who are keenly aware of what happened in the 1930s and 40s in Poland, and the collaboration of Polish citizens with the Nazi crimes.
Excuse me.
That was a misunderstanding.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Germany.
You are talking about the
Absence in Germany.
German perception of what happened in Poland, right? Because I didn't quite understand. Because I'm asking why the Germans, like a broader German public, is not aware in general about the very fact and atrocities committed during the Nazi occupation of Poland.
Yes, of course. Well, that's a good question, and I think we touch a paradox here, because on the one hand, on a global scale, and there is no time in history that so many people have received history education in their schools all over the planet. The education, the alphabetization, and the history education has been on the rise in the past 50 years all over the world. Not as much as we would like, but it has been a success. Education has been a success. The eradication of analphabetism and also of historical ignorance has been a success. That's one leg of the paradox. The other is that we see today that disinformation, historical disinformation, is also on the rise. How is that possible? I have spent 42 years of my life as a teacher in secondary education at the university. I have tried to form and to build generations of young historians in the critical. I have tried to introduce them in the critical tools of our trade as historians. And still what we see is that in general, not only in Germany, also in Belgium, the Netherlands, Russia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, you name it, people do not know, do not know even the most basic facts of their history, let alone the history of others. And that is because I think the answer is theoretically very simple. History is not only a cognitive business. It's not only a matter of knowledge. It's not only a matter of epistemology. There are other things that also play a role, like our biases, our cognitive illusions, of confirmation of what we think, and our resistance to evidence, to peer review, our resistance to peer-reviewed and evidence-based truths, that provisional truths of historians. People resist it. Why? I feel, yes, I am really disappointed in my own generation. Although we had all the luck in the world and much progress, what we now see is a victory of historical disinformation, especially online.
Thank you. Your question towards our point.
Since you are the panel.
Yeah, but shortly, because I see a lot of questions there, so yeah. I like the diversify the voices of the panel.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to quickly follow on that discussion. I think to some extent you gave the answer in the first panel. It's when Germany invaded Russia in 1941. And I think that speaks to the mental map that dominates in the German public discourse, where there is no Ukraine, there's no Belarus, there's no Poland as part of historical actors, but it's about kind of the eastern border of Germany is Russia in the mental map, also that is conveyed in history teaching. I mean, we don't speak about Polish history in secondary education. The teachers will tell you that there's no space in the brains of the children. And to some extent that is true. No, that is the answer you will get. And to some extent, when you go to German schools and you try to bring information about East Central Europe, you realize that there's absolutely no knowledge. And it's not just East Central Europe. I mean, it's very similar with French or Spanish history. History is still so much in a national column that any breaching out of that national setting is a cognitive stretch for young people. And you add to that what Anton has just said with the rise of social media, disinformation and so on, I think it makes it very kind of palpable why that inverting of perspectives is so difficult to teach. And I think that's explaining this kind of absence of East Central Europe to my mind. That's the mental maps. And it brings me to a kind of remark I would like to make, since Anton mentioned me and the multi-perspectivity, and I think many in the room share that this is a sacred cow for very, very good reasons. And I don't want to be misunderstood in the first panel. I mean, it doesn't mean that we should be naive about multi-perspectivity. We shouldn't just invite Putin and put him on an equal setting with everyone else's historical views. And unfortunately, this is what has been done for a long time, especially in Germany. I want to kind of remind everyone of 2021, when Putin was given space in Die Zeit, which is one of the most kind of respected German weeklies, to write a very long article about the outbreak of the Second World War. And the title was "To Be Friends Despite Misunderstandings." And that article did not receive any contextualization for weeks. And that, of course, is the wrong way of bringing in multi-perspectivity. I think it's very important that we make it clear what the Russian view is on 1941, because people in Germany have these interpretations anyway. So you can't deny them, but it's really important that the public sphere contextualizes that, shows where the history is being abused and where propaganda is being created. And I think for long, especially in Germany, I mean, Putin was given the platform in Die Zeit, and people are reading about it as if it were a value-free and power-free historical interpretation of 1941. And that's the wrong way of doing multi-perspectivity. But it doesn't mean we should stop with it, because the multi-perspectivity is part of our societies, especially as they grow ever more diverse with migration and generational change. So we need to learn to integrate the power positions of each speaker in the multi-perspectivity. That's, I think, an important kind of nuance to make for multi-perspectivity.
I allow myself very short point on this thing, because I participate in the international network of solidarity, where there are people from different regions, and I really feel more understanding from comrades from Iran or Chinese anarchists who also understand the problem of campism, and we can speak about the Cold War with them more freely. So I feel the power of multi-perspectivity in this way, and fighting the binary narratives of the past also. And that was your question.
Yeah. Do you hear me well? Yeah. So my name is Mila Oiva. I'm both representative of Historians Without Borders in Finland, but I'm also historian by myself from the University of Turku in Finland. First of all, I really would like to thank you all for this wonderful discussion. I think I have learned so much, and there are so many thoughts. But I just wanted to address one thing that has repeated, was already addressed in the first panel and has been repeated now, is namely the need for limitation of freedom of speech, especially in social media. And I think that is of course, I see where this kind of like need in a way comes from, because of the problems of flooding and all these, as we have been discussing. But of course, as we all know, this opens many very important questions if we start to consider these things, like who will select and based on which principles, what is what is allowed and what is not. And this is, of course, then because I think that I have been doing some research on circulation of fake historical narratives in online sphere, and I think that some of these narratives, although they are counterfactual, they somehow erase from this emotional needs for belonging to a great nation and identity building that comes back to the things that were raised here, this kind of like compassion and feelings that are also related to knowledge as well. So I'm thinking that if we start to limit freedom of speech, then there is of course a great threat that we will create even more silences or in historical research and discussions. So I'm just wondering if you have some ideas on how to do this in a good way. I would be very happy to hear about that, and just, or if you have some additional thoughts about this. Thank you.
Actually, we have 1 minute left, and probably this is a big discussion for the coffee break, but I think there was one hand there from you. Yes. Say, yes, so.
Hello, my name is Sandeep. I'm from India and I'm a first semester student here at ICD. First of all, I learned so much from all the various inputs that we had. I framed my question in a, you may call it provocative, but the key word in the discussion was Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which means overcoming the past. But I do feel increasingly Germany is moving from Vergangenheitsbewältigung to Vergangenheitsüberkompensierung, which means overcompensation for the past instead of just making up with what you've done not so well in the past. And I know this might sound very provocative, especially sitting here in Europe in a place where I think there are more speakers for Israel's cause. But I do think what has been happening in Gaza over the last 2 years, in full knowledge of the world and given the horrors that the world has already seen inside of the last century, and then the strides that have been made since then to move forward and onward and to leave behind horrors of those sort behind, I do think it is increasingly futile, everything that was done academically, politically, every which way possible. Would you agree with me when I then frame this whole discussion as Germany moving away from Vergangenheitsbewältigung to Vergangenheitsüberkompensierung? And if I have misframed it and misunderstood it, what would you say would be Germany's correct approach? As I think Henning said this, from today's perspective, Germany needs to think afresh. It cannot remain stuck in a 1945 World War II perspective of what they have severely done wrong to the Jewish community and during the Shoah. So that was my question, and I'm sorry if it offends anyone here.
Do we have time for that from lunch? Like, how do you feel?
Well, we don't actually have some,
yeah,
but this is a very interesting discussion.
Yes.
Maybe we can do like a closing round and
yeah.
people can address.
And there was one last question from very corner. Yeah, like thanks. And then you can cover up your last
I will be
topic.
brief because I have already asked a question, but on the topic of denial, I come from the US. I've seen quite often in my country on various issues. My question, I will try to keep it brief, is what are the strategies and approaches on a human level, on an individual level, that you can offer to approach someone to break down those walls, to access also, their human side and convince them or try to access their critical thinking so that they can see that they can bring to light, and in the case that if they are manipulated or if they have been misinformed, how do you approach that on an individual level to access their critical thinking and see the truth when it comes to denying certain atrocities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is the time for our last points. And I think you can start because it's about empathy and.
Thank you. The German overcompensation for the past when it comes to the Holocaust is, at a close look, a form of gatekeeping. And if I understood Christoph, he did not say it as bluntly, then he actually suggested exactly that. They often use singularity of the Holocaust, denies that any victims of genocide, wherever they happen, or mass crimes, have singular experiences. They are as traumatized. So pointing at the singularity of one event is basically putting up blinders not to acknowledge similar experiences by others traumatized by very similar experiences. The Holocaust denies for a very long time what happened to Sintesa and Roma and others, gays, leftists, executed under the same label. But the Holocaust is associated to one specific group. And the never again by the survivors of Buchenwald meant what they said. Never again is never again is never again. And genocide is genocide is genocide. But dismissing that, and at the same time overlooking what happened in Poland, what happened in Greece, what happened in Italy, what happened in the colonial days of German colonialism, is an ideological blinder. The Nazi regime and the Holocaust did not fall from heaven. Hannah Arendt, in her study on totalitarianism, pointed out that to understand what culminated in the Nazi regime and the Holocaust had the mental seeds in German colonialism. That does not mean there is a direct road from Shark Island, the concentration camp in Southwest Africa, to Auschwitz. But it means to fully grasp how that could happen, you need to go back. Not Auschwitz was the Zivilisationsbruch. Zivilisationsbruch happened much earlier and was not only confined to Germany, but the singularity that is stressed with the Holocaust is a form of denialism.
Yes, I think I would agree. But on the other hand, the term Vergangenheitsbewältigung is a problematic term too, because it implies that you can come to an end with dealing with the past. Yeah. If you do it proper, then there will be an end and everything is good again. And this is typical for the German thinking after 1945, but it's very, very problematic. So I would not say that there is only a negative shift from the 50s to actual times, but it's not so easy. It's ambivalent, I would say. Another point that's important for me is that my idea was not to say, okay, we have to limit free speech, and opposite. What we have to limit, I think, is the power of this very big capitalized platforms, which are owned of a few people, normally in the US and now in China, and they earn their money with getting attention. And this is very, very problematic for the discourse, I think. And these mechanisms we have to regulate, not the opinions. The problem is the enforcement of very problematic and wrong positions, historical pictures, not that they are there. You can censorship them, but I don't really believe in censorship of historical positions, historical statements. But this enforcement of this to earn money, this is problematic for the discourse and for our remembrance culture, I think.
Thank you. Yes, the question about restrictions on freedom of expression. I'm a firm believer in the human rights doctrine on freedom of expression. The right to freedom of expression is a universal right, but in contrast to the right to freedom of thought, it is not an absolute right. Freedom of expression can be restricted under very strict conditions because there are countervailing interests that have to be balanced with freedom of expression. Freedom of expression can be suspended in times of emergency, in times of war, under very strict conditions. Freedom of expression, if it reaches the level of hate speech, should be prohibited by law, including with fines, prohibition with fines, prohibition with reparation for the victims of the hate speech, and punishment, including prison, for the worst form, the most extreme forms of hate speech. So the idea that that the right to freedom of expression is absolute is, in my view, nonsense. The human rights doctrine about freedom of expression is far more subtle. That's one. Second, what do we do when we are confronted with a denier in our midst, at the table, during breakfast, in the street, etc.? That is a very good question. I'm not sure about my answer, but I would proceed, I believe, like Socrates in ancient Greece. I would ask questions. I would, if somebody denies a corroborated crime, I would try to throw doubt and say, by asking questions, like Socrates did, are you sure that it is this? Have you thought about that piece of evidence? And by asking questions, I would try to, not directly, but indirectly, try to influence the denier's position. And finally, I want to express my complete agreement with Christophe, who has pleaded more than once for more digital safety. And I think one of the ways forward in this cashmere and this nightmare of disinformation that is flooding around us is good legislation on a European Union level, the Digital Safety Act. And we should stand firm against the power of big tech and try not to waver in this respect. Digital Safety Act is a good start, and we should try to apply it. Of course, application of law is difficult, but that is one of the ways forward. That I want to say as a conclusion.
Thank you very, very much. And now time is up, and we have lunch. And yes, we will explain. Thank you.